Have you ever asked yourself what UFO really means? Welcome to the unwrapped flying object tutorial. Let's get those UVs sorted. We will unwrap our flying saucer in Houdini. UV mapping is the process of projecting a 2D texture onto a 3D surface. You can think of it like designing a t-shirt. You start with a flat sheet of fabric, cut it to match the shape of the body, and then stitch them together along the seams. When it comes to UV mapping in 3D space, this process is basically reversed. The letters U and V represent the horizontal and vertical axis of the texture space, which always runs from 0 to 1. To place your 3D model into that space, you need to get rid of the third dimension and unfold it as cleanly as possible by cutting it open, sometimes even splitting it up into different parts to minimize distortion. Once laid out, the UV coordinates tell the software exactly where every pixel of the texture should land on your model. For something simple like our cube here, there are only a handful ways to unfold it, 11 distinct patterns to be exact. But for more complex geometry, we need smarter approaches. We can use different projection methods like orthographic, cylindrical or polar mapping, but these often introduce stretching and unwanted overlapping. The more reliable method is to treat your model like that t-shirt from before. Carefully choose where you place your seams, cut the surface open and arrange the UV islands in a way that keeps the texture as distortion and overlap free as possible. And now we have a look how to do this inside of Houdini. Here in Houdini I opened up our little UFO model again, and now we want to texture this bad boy. So what is tempting to do is to attach a UV texture node at the bottom, and you will see that this texture is going to be orthographically projected onto our mesh. And the projection axis for this is the y-axis. So we will basically look from the top at our object and shoot down our UV coordinates. If you want to have a look on those things in UV space, you can hit space 5 and you can see we have here our 0 to 1 U and 0 to 1 V coordinate grid. It usually comes with this kind of checkerboard texture, so you can really see where are your seams and how different islands would connect to each other. Spacebar 1 to come back to the perspective viewport, and you can see it looks already quite cool, but for areas like here, which are also really straight in the Y direction, it doesn't work really well. We could try out different kind of axes, like X or Z, but we will always have this kind of stretched UVs and they will just look weird in the rendering part. Okay, so let's abandon this and let's try out a UV project node. Wire this in, highlight it, and per default it is also set to the orthographic view, but we can just maybe go to the cylindrical view, and once I highlight our show handle tool, you can see a little preview. I mean, our UFO is also quite a cylindrical object, so this fits actually quite well, and we could actually say our Y coordinate, let's set this to 2 maybe, 2.5, which would even it out a little bit better. But once we have a look at our UVs again, you see there's a lot of overlapping and it's not really nice. So areas that would actually overlay are sampling the same texture that will be applied here, and you will have this weird repetitions and stuff. So this is also not what we want. Let's come back and let's try out the polar option, which is quite okay-ish. I would say we can do better. Let's have a look at this layout. You can see there's again a lot of overlapping. Could solve this by dropping down a UV layout, wire this in, and it tries to pack your UV islands. So if I hover over them, you can see the individual islands into this 0 to 1 space and do it as efficiently as possible. So of course you can increase the padding between islands here, or you can start and introduce some rotations, but all these operations are computational very, very heavy, and yeah, then smaller the number, the more Houdini needs to think. For this object it is still quite fast, but once you have more complex objects it can take quite some time. Okay, once we look at this in our perspective viewport, you can see like we packed the areas quite nicely. We can even check this option that to scale the islands to match their actual surface areas. So once I hit this, all these things get significantly bigger, and Houdini will just try to match all these little squares to be more or less the same size. So let's zoom out again, and that looks actually already quite cool. Just the areas down here and up here are a bit weird. Another handy note in here is the UV quick shade node, which basically will take all your UVs into account, and you can very quickly apply a quick texture and you can get a feeling for it, how it will look like. Okay, but let's get rid of this, and I want to show you my favorite way to deal with the UVs. And for a complex object like this, I would divide it into parts, and looking at the node tree here, I would always think about UVs while I'm building a geometry. And once I come close to the end of the section, so basically everywhere where I put in null objects, I would already calculate some UVs for the specific option, which are then getting merged right before the end, and then we are going to append a UV layout and everything gets distributed quite nicely. Okay, up here we don't need some yet, but here for all of those sections, what I want to do in here is basically use a group like this bevel group, where we selected all the edges, to cut my UVs open and split each and every section in a separate island. But we used this bevel group somewhere in between, and we added a lot of steps and added more details and bevels, so they won't be accurate anymore. Therefore we can attach a auto seam node. Once I wire this in, it already tries to find hard edges, and it will suggest some seams, how to cut my geometry. I can make sure I include some edges. I can assign attributes to my geometry to say, okay, this should be for sure in one UV island. Maybe we can use the color for that. We can adjust them with this kind of grain slider here. And once we found something that we like, I think we're going to default, it will save it as this seams group. And inside a UV flatten node, which I will append afterwards, I can select the themes group and have nicely sized UVs for each of the sections. And of course I could put a UV layout now in here, but it will get processed so many more times, so it's better to put this UV layout at the end. In here we have our bottom part. The bottom part is basically generated through this poly extrude here, and for this I also want to go and select a UV flatten like this. You see it stretches quite weirdly. I can also go via this handle and select manually some themes. With the shift and a double click I can select this ring here, and I try to select areas where we can easily hide the seam. I mean, in here we probably won't ever see it. So once I hit enter now, I can already see that the map looks a little bit better. Maybe I would do another cut. Once I hold down shift and A, I can select a longer line here, and I'm cutting it here in order to open this island up and basically remove the distortion from it, and that looks already quite good. So I think that might be it for our bottom part here. I will jump over and go to our window section up here. Ideally, and I will just template the frame here, we can hide one seam behind here. So we will do the same thing. We will drop down a UV flatten node like this. I mean, right now we are looking from the top on it. Actually looks quite good, but we get a little bit this distortion here to the sides. So I would rather prefer to cut it open at one side to open it up, or maybe even splitting it up in two sides. So I can just double click to select the ring here and shift double click here to select the ring here. And we will get these areas. And of course we added a thickness, so we will also need to double click quickly here, and we double click down here, and now we should end up in 4 sections exactly. Now they're overlapping a bit, but our UV layout will handle it in a second. Okay, that looks a bit better to me. That's the windows. For the window frame, which is a bit more of a complex geometry, I mean, in here I would basically UV flatten node again, fired in, select themes, going in here to really select some areas where I think I can hide the seams best, like this. Then I will select one ring down here. We select the ring here, and up here we can select it directly in the corner like this, and up here we select maybe this flowery shape, and to get rid of the distortion like this with the Shift A trick again to select this loop segment. Yeah, so let's hit enter and see how it looks. That's not bad, I would say. Okay, so we come down to the antenna for our sphere. We can use our UV project node very quick and choose the polar option because we are dealing with a sphere, which is quite good. Sometimes there will be like a weird section in here. You see it down here. Sometimes this can happen, but then you just click this fix boundaries themes and this will be solved. And for the sweep side, the sweep node comes with this nice tab up here with the UVs and attributes. So you can just click compute UVs and it will solve it for us. Basically unwraps this kind of cylinder completely in the 0 to 1 space. So this is solving our antenna. Our ring already has UVs. And last but not least, we have our details, which are our window elements, which is this tube. So before the tube gets copied over, and let's quickly give this cylinder some UVs. We might be tempted to give it some UVs with the UV project node, like this, and choose the cylinder option and then say the XY plane, but this doesn't look good. And for the cylinder I would also do 2 cuts, one here and maybe one that connects the two. So let's get rid of this and drop down our trusty UV flatten node down here. And for the seams we double click those both rings and select one down here. Hit enter. That looks good. This is going to be copied to all our windows, and we are just left with this box here, which we can unwrap with UV flatten. Select it and say we wanna maybe not here, maybe we divide it here. I think this should already wrap it up nicely, maybe like this. And once we do it like this, you see it is unwrapped, but we can still texture over it, and like some scratches would nicely follow over this kind of side panel here. And like this, each and every object has its UVs, but you see this very chaotic UV map. And last but not least, we say the UV layout node, put it in here, let it calculate for a while, and say scale islands to match their surface area. And we get quite a nicely laid out UV map, with some sections still having some overlaps. This is due to our automated seams up here. We could come in and tweak some sections, but I would say for the sake of the tutorial, it is fine to leave it like this. Now you know how to cut UVs, lay them out, try to give them as much texture space as possible, because in the end, this will be your texture, and depending on the size, this is the resolution each and every part gets. I mean, you could split it up if you really want to have very high detail textures on, let's say, the metal ring. You could generate its own UV map in order for it to occupy the most texture space available here. Before you go, one final hack, and I would say delete everything for now, especially the UV texture again. So we are empty. The last trick I wanted to show you is the Labs Auto UV, and this basically probably serves you well in 90% of the cases. You can choose from different kind of methods. I usually leave it on auto theme. You can play a bit with the input here. If you look at the UV map, it's also quite nicely layout. You can always combine this, of course, with a UV layout tool again that packs it again a bit more efficiently, or like you can choose different kind of angles. This setup probably is more time efficient, and the results are good enough. So this video could have been way shorter, but now you know all the details and how to do it manually. See you in the next one. Cheers.